December 17, 1867. The Strathbogie Ranges, Colonial, Victoria. Senior Constable Robert Marlowe stands frozen in the pre-dawn mist, his service revolver lowering as he stares at the half-wild Dingo pawing at the earth beside a lightning-scarred gum tree. The beast, part domestic dog, part wild dingo, has led him 3 miles from the burned-out shepherd's hut. Its amber eyes meet his for a single moment before it resumes digging. Marlowe approaches slowly. The animal retreats. What the constable sees in the shallow depression makes his blood run cold. A human hand, bone-white and perfectly preserved by the mineral-rich soil, clutching what appears to be a gold sovereign. He begins to dig. By noon they will have unearthed 4 bodies. By nightfall, they will have recovered 17 pounds of gold dust hidden in waterproofed canvas sacks. And by week's end, the colony will learn that the loyal companion of bushranger Thomas "Black Tom" Maguire had done what 3 years of colonial police work could not, expose the darkest chapter of the Kelly Country Rangeland Wars. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Bushranger's Dingo, the half-wild dog that betrayed an outlaw's hideout and led troopers to buried gold and bodies, make sure to subscribe to the Fear Abbey and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's darkest corners. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers across the globe. Now let's descend into one of colonial Australia's most chilling tales. The year is 1864, and colonial Victoria exists in a state of perpetual tension. The gold rushes that transformed Melbourne from a colonial outpost into one of the wealthiest cities in the British Empire are entering their twilight years. The easy surface gold is gone. What remains requires capital, machinery, and corporate investment, resources far beyond the reach of the individual prospector. Thousands of men who came seeking fortune now find themselves destitute, skilled in nothing but digging and desperate enough to consider alternatives the law cannot countenance. The Strathbogie Ranges, roughly 90 miles northeast of Melbourne, represent the frayed edge of colonial civilization. Here, the dense eucalyptus forests provide cover for those who choose to live outside the law. The terrain is unforgiving, steep gullies carved by ancient waterways, granite outcrops that tower above the canopy, and miles of bushland where a man can disappear for months without detection. This is Kelly Country, named for the Irish families who settled these ranges and whose sons will in a decade's time produce Australia's most infamous outlaw. But in 1864, the Kelly name is just one among many Irish Catholic families scratching out existence on marginal land, resenting the Protestant squatters who control the best grazing runs, and harboring sympathies for any man willing to thumb his nose at colonial authority. Into this powder keg of resentment walks Thomas Maguire. At 28 years old, Maguire cuts an unremarkable figure. 5 feet 9 inches tall, according to police records. Dark hair, weathered complexion, a scar above his left eyebrow from a mining accident at Bendigo. He arrives in the Strathbogie district in March 1864, taking work as a boundary rider for Andrew Morrison's Violet Town cattle station. Morrison will later testify that Maguire was competent but solitary, preferring the company of his dog to fellow workers. The dog in question is a creature of mixed heritage that defies easy classification. Contemporary accounts describe it as approximately 20 inches at the shoulder, with the lean build and tawny coat of a dingo but the broader head and loyalty patterns of a domestic shepherd dog. Maguire calls the animal warrigal, an Aboriginal word meaning both wild dog and outlaw. The significance of this name will become apparent only later. Maguire's employment at Violet Town lasts 7 months. During this period, the district experiences an unusual spike in cattle theft. Nothing dramatic, but enough to strain relations between squatters and the selector families they suspect of harboring thieves. Constable Edward Kelly, no relation to the later infamous family, notes in his occurrence book that stock losses at Morrison's Run totaled 23 head between March and October, with no arrests forthcoming despite increased patrols. On October 12, 1864, Andrew Morrison discovers his strongbox has been forced open. The amount missing is precisely catalogued in court documents: 47 pounds sterling in gold sovereigns, 12 pounds in banknotes, and 3 ounces of gold dust held for payment to seasonal workers. Thomas Maguire and his half-wild dog are gone by dawn. What follows is the beginning of a 3-year reign of terror that will claim at least 9 lives, though the true number, as authorities will discover, may be far higher. But in October 1864, as Maguire disappears into the Strathbogie Ranges, no one yet understands they are witnessing the birth of one of colonial Victoria's most cunning and ruthless bushrangers. The colony's newspapers, still enamored with the romanticized image of bushrangers as gentlemen thieves in the tradition of Dick Turpin, will initially treat Maguire's exploits with a mixture of condemnation and fascination. The Melbourne Argus runs breathless accounts of his raids, always noting the presence of his faithful canine companion, and portraying the bushranger as a kind of Antipodean Robin Hood. This narrative will not survive contact with reality. The first confirmed Maguire robbery occurs on the Euroa Road, approximately 15 miles south of Violet Town. Gold escort driver James Whitmore is transporting a modest shipment, 600 pounds in gold dust and coin from the Wombat Ranges diggings to the Melbourne Bank. Whitmore's testimony to the Beechworth magistrate provides our most detailed early description of Maguire's methods. It was approximately 2 in the afternoon, the sun still high, and the road seemingly empty. I heard the dog before I saw the man. A strange cry, half howl and half bark, unlike anything I had encountered. My horses grew agitated. Then the animal appeared on the road ahead, a wild-looking thing, neither fully dingo nor fully dog. It stood its ground as we approached, and I was obliged to halt the escort lest the horses bolt. The moment I drew rein, the man emerged from the scrub to my left. He wore a dark coat and cabbage tree hat pulled low, a black silk neckerchief covering the lower portion of his face. He carried a double-barreled shotgun, which he leveled at my chest with distressing familiarity. "Down from the box, friend," he said, his voice cultivated, lacking the rough accent one expects from bushrangers. "Make no sudden movements and you'll see your family again." I complied. What choice had I? He instructed me to open the strongbox while the dog, and I swear this detail upon my oath, the dog positioned itself behind me, teeth bared, as if it understood its master's criminal intent. The beast had been trained to guard prisoners. Maguire escapes with 400 pounds in gold. Unusually for bushrangers of the period, he takes only the gold and coin, leaving the banknotes untouched. This detail puzzles authorities until they understand its significance. Banknotes can be traced through serial numbers, but gold is anonymous, fungible, and easily disposed of. The Euroa robbery establishes Maguire's pattern. He works alone, uses the dog to unsettle both horses and victims, and displays none of the theatrical flourishes that characterize bushrangers like Captain Moonlight or Frank Gardner. There are no speeches about Colonial. Injustice. No sympathetic gestures toward poor victims. Maguire is purely transactional. He takes the money and disappears. 3 months after the Euroa holdup, Maguire makes his first confirmed kill. Patrick O'Brien is a selector, one of the small farmers granted conditional purchase land under the Robertson Land Acts. His 320-acre plot sits in the foothills of the Strathbogie Ranges, marginal country suitable only for a few head of cattle and subsistence crops. O'Brien lives alone, his wife having died in childbirth 2 years prior, the infant surviving only 3 days. On April 3rd, O'Brien fails to appear at Sunday Mass at the Catholic Church in Violet Town. Father Michael Brennan, concerned for his parishioners' spiritual welfare, rides out to O'Brien's selection the following morning. What he discovers is documented in his statement to police. The door to Mr. O'Brien's hut stood open, which I found peculiar as Patrick was fastidious about securing his property against the weather and wandering stock. I called out but received no answer. Upon entering, I observed signs of disturbance, a chair overturned, Patrick's pipe lying broken upon the floor, and most disturbing, what appeared to be dark stains upon the earthen floor near the fireplace. I found Patrick in his bed, or what remained of him. He had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head at close range. The violence done to his person suggested the killer had wanted absolute certainty of death. His strongbox had been forced open, the contents removed. Most peculiar, however, were the paw prints I observed in the blood that had pooled beneath the bed. Dog prints, but larger than any domestic animal I had encountered, with distinctive claw marks that suggested a wild beast. The inquest into O'Brien's death reveals several troubling facts. First, neighbors report seeing a man matching Maguire's description in the vicinity 2 days before the murder, accompanied by a large yellowish dog of uncertain breed. Second, O'Brien had recently received payment for cattle sold at the Benalla yards, approximately 35 pounds, a substantial sum for a selector. Third, and most disturbing, the trajectory of the gunshot wounds suggests O'Brien was shot while lying in bed, likely asleep or incapacitated. This is not a robbery gone wrong. This is premeditated murder for financial gain. The coroner, Dr. William Headley, includes an unusual observation in his report. I note with some concern the presence of multiple dog bite marks upon the deceased's hands and forearms, inflicted perimortem or immediately post-mortem. While I cannot definitively state these injuries contributed to death, they suggest the perpetrator's canine companion played an active role in subduing or terrorizing the victim. The romanticized image of Thomas Maguire begins to crack. By autumn of 1865, the colonial Victorian government has placed a reward of £200 on Maguire's head, a substantial sum indicating the seriousness with which authorities view the threat. Additional police have been deployed to the Strathbogie region, and several Irish selector families have been subjected to aggressive questioning about their possible support for the bushranger. This increased pressure appears to have no effect on Maguire's operations. On September 28th, the mail coach traveling from Shepparton to Melbourne carries an unusually valuable cargo, gold shipments from several Goulburn Valley properties, accumulated over 3 weeks due to escort scheduling issues. The total value exceeds £1,000. The robbery occurs at Whitehead's Creek, a narrow ford where the road descends sharply between granite outcrops, ideal ambush territory. But this time, Maguire does not work alone. Driver Charles Morrison, nephew of Andrew Morrison, Maguire's former employer, later testifies to a panel of inquiry. "We had just entered the ford when I heard the dog, that accursed howling that every driver in the district had learned to fear. My guard, Samuel Price, raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from the rocks above. Samuel cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. Then Maguire appeared on the road ahead, his shotgun trained upon me. But he was not alone. 2 other men emerged from the scrub, both masked, both armed. One was a giant of a fellow, well over 6 feet tall. The other was slight, almost boyish in build. Down from the box, Maguire ordered, his voice calm as if discussing the weather. You'll not be harmed if you cooperate. The dogs circled our horses, keeping them agitated while the 3 men worked with professional efficiency. They knew exactly which luggage compartments held the gold shipments. The entire robbery consumed perhaps 10 minutes. Before they departed, Maguire approached Samuel Price, who lay bleeding upon the road. I feared he would finish the poor man. But instead, he tore a strip from Samuel's shirt and bound the wound with surprising competence. You'll live, he told Samuel. Tell the traps they're chasing shadows. Tell them Warrigal and I send our regards. The Whitehead's Creek robbery represents a significant escalation. Maguire now commands a gang. The wounded guard survives, but the bullet, extracted by Dr. Headley in Shepparton, is preserved as evidence, and its distinctive rifling will later play a crucial role in connecting multiple crimes. More disturbing is the intelligence gathered in the robbery's aftermath. Informants within the Irish selector community whisper that Maguire has established a network of safe houses throughout the Strathbogie ranges, that he has cached supplies and ammunition at multiple locations, and that his half-wild dog has become something of a legend, a creature of almost supernatural cunning that can track police patrols and warn its master of approaching danger. Superintendent Frederick Standish, head of the Victorian police force, writes in a confidential memorandum to the Colonial Secretary, the situation regarding the bushranger Maguire has deteriorated beyond acceptable bounds. He operates with impunity throughout the Northeast, has recruited accomplices, and has cultivated sympathizers among the selector population who provide him intelligence and shelter. Most concerning is the psychological effect his continued freedom has upon public confidence in law enforcement. We are made to appear incompetent, chasing a criminal and his dog through country they know intimately while we remain strangers. Throughout the winter of 1866, a disturbing pattern emerges that will not be recognized as such until much later. A swagman named Michael Doherty, traveling from the Ovens diggings toward Melbourne, is last seen at Violet Town on June 14th. He carried his accumulated earnings, approximately £60 in gold and notes, in a leather satchel. He is never seen again. A Chinese prospector known only as Ah Sing vanishes between Benalla and Euroa on July 2nd. His companions report he was carrying his season's takings to send home to Canton via the Melbourne Chinese merchants. The amount is estimated at £90. Sarah Clements, a widow traveling to live with her sister in Melbourne, disappears on July 29th after taking a room at the Euroa Hotel. She had recently sold her late husband's selection for £120, the money in gold sovereigns sewn into the lining of her traveling bag. The bag is found 3 weeks later in Bushland, 5 miles from town. It is empty. 2 prospectors, brothers named William and Edward Harding, failed to arrive at the Wombat Ranges diggings in August. They were known to be carrying tools and supplies purchased in Melbourne worth approximately £40, plus their personal savings. None of these disappearances initially connect to Maguire. Missing persons are tragically common in colonial Victoria. People fall from horses, drown in flooded creeks, die of snakebite or exposure in the bush. Colony is vast and dangerous, and death comes easily to the unprepared or unlucky. But there are whispers. Selector families speak in hushed tones of seeing a man and a yellowish dog in the vicinity of each disappearance. Some report hearing that distinctive howl in the night, half-wild dingo, half-domestic dog, that has become Maguire's calling card. The police, overwhelmed with maintaining order across the sprawling colony and focused on confirmed robberies, treat the disappearances as separate incidents of misadventure. This is a catastrophic miscalculation. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and share this with someone who loves dark mysteries from history's shadows. What we're about to uncover gets even more disturbing. Let's discover what happens next. December 16th, 1867. 3 years after Thomas Maguire first disappeared into the Strathbogie Ranges, the discovery begins not with police work but with fire. Lightning strikes during a summer thunderstorm ignite a small shepherd's hut on the eastern slopes of the Strathbogies, approximately 12 miles from Violet Town. The hut, used seasonally by workers from Morrison's cattle run, burns to its stone foundation. When the fires cool, local bushmen investigating the ruins make a curious discovery. The hut's small root cellar, dug into the hillside, contains recently disturbed earth and what appears to be a dog's bed fashioned from grain sacks and an old wool blanket. This information reaches Senior Constable Robert Marlowe through a selector named James Kelly, again a relation to the later famous family, who reports seeing a large tan-colored dog, possibly wild, fleeing the area as the hut burned. Marlowe, who has spent 3 frustrating years chasing rumors of Maguire through the ranges, decides to investigate personally. What draws his attention is not the burned hut, but a detail in Kelly's report. The dog appeared to be injured, favoring its right front paw, and seemed disoriented, circling back toward the ruins before fleeing again. On the morning of December 17th, Marlowe and Trooper William Davies ride to the burned hut accompanied by a tracker named Billy Mundara, an Aboriginal man whose services the police periodically employ. Mundara immediately notices what the white men have missed: fresh paw prints leading away from the ruins, the right front print showing a distinctive drag that indicates injury. That dog hurt, Mundara tells Marlowe, walking in circles, not thinking straight. Maybe we follow. They follow. The tracks lead them on a wandering path through dense bush, doubling back, circling, the behavior of an animal in distress or confusion. After approximately 3 miles, they emerge into a small clearing dominated by a massive eucalyptus tree, its trunk scarred black from an old lightning strike. The dog is there, or rather, what remains of it. Marlowe's official report filed that evening reads, "At approximately 8:45 a.m., we located the animal in question beneath a large gum tree showing evidence of lightning damage. The creature was deceased, apparently having succumbed to injuries sustained during the fire or subsequent flight. Upon closer examination, Mr. Mundara identified burn marks upon the animal's hindquarters and right front paw. What occurred next defies ready explanation. The deceased animal had been pawing at the earth before expiring, and the disturbed soil revealed what appeared to be fragments of canvas fabric protruding from the ground. Acting upon instinct, I began to excavate the area with my hands. Within moments, I had uncovered a human hand, partially skeletal, clutching what I immediately recognized as a gold sovereign. The hand appeared to have been buried for some considerable time, the flesh desiccated but preserved by the mineral content of the soil, which has a distinctive reddish hue in this location. Immediate. Telly ceased excavation and sent Trooper Davies to Violet Town to summon assistance and notify Superintendent Nicholson. Mr. Mundara and I established a perimeter around the site and awaited reinforcement. By 2:00 p.m., a team of police and civilian volunteers has assembled at the lightning-scarred tree. What they unearth over the next 6 hours will horrify the colony. The first body, the one Marlowe discovered, is that of an adult male, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, dressed in rotted clothing that suggests a laborer or swagman. The skeleton shows catastrophic trauma to the skull, consistent with a close-range gunshot wound. The gold sovereign clutched in the hand is dated 1863. Superintendent Nicholson orders systematic excavation in a 20-foot radius around the tree. They find the second body 18 inches from the first, buried at the same depth. An adult male, similar build, similar skull trauma. No identification, but the fragments of a leather satchel yield 2 more gold sovereigns and what appears to be a small jade carving, the type Chinese prospectors often carried as good luck talismans. The third body is discovered 4 feet to the north. Female, evident from the pelvic structure, with fragments of a dress that Dr. Headley summoned from Shepperton, identifies as consistent with mourning attire from the mid-1860s. The skull shows the same catastrophic damage. Tangled in the skeletal fingers is a gold chain with a locket containing a daguerreotype photograph, a woman and infant child. The fourth body nearly breaks the excavation team's resolve. It is significantly smaller than the others. A child, Dr. Headley estimates, between 8 and 10 years old. The cause of death is identical to the others, execution-style gunshot to the head at close range. This discovery, which will later prove to be misidentified, as no missing children match the time frame, spurs the excavation to continue into the night by lantern light. As darkness falls, they make 2 additional discoveries that transform the investigation from murder to something approaching a massacre. First, they uncover a waterproofed canvas bag buried 3 feet deep, directly beneath where the dog's body lay. The bag contains 17 pounds of gold dust, 42 gold sovereigns of various dates, and 14 pounds sterling in banknotes from the period 1864 to 1866. The total value exceeds 300 pounds. Second, and most damning, they discover a leather saddlebag containing personal effects, a pipe with the initials P.O., carved into the bowl, a woman's wedding ring engraved with C. 1862, a Chinese laborer's brass identification tag bearing the character marks for Ah Sing, and most horrifically, a child's cloth doll, its dress stained with what Dr. Headley tentatively identifies as blood. Superintendent Nicholson, standing in the lantern light surrounded by the remains of the murdered, makes a decision that will define his career. He orders the site expanded to a 50-foot radius and summons additional manpower from Benalla and Shepperton. Over the next 3 days, they will excavate 5 additional bodies, bringing the total to 9 confirmed victims. Each shows the same execution method. Each was buried in soil whose mineral content has partially mummified the remains, preserving enough tissue and clothing to suggest identities. The meticulous Dr. Headley documents every detail: bullet trajectories, post-mortem injuries including dog bites on 3 of the victims, the state of preservation, the personal effects found with each body. His report will run to 47 pages and include detailed anatomical drawings. But it is the dog, the half-wild dingo that led them to this charnel ground, that captures the colony's horrified imagination. In death, the animal is examined by a veterinary surgeon from Melbourne, who determines it to be approximately 8 to 10 years old, showing signs of extensive training and bearing scars consistent with a life lived partially in the wild. This animal, the surgeon writes, displayed intelligence remarkable even among the most accomplished working dogs. Its final act, returning to the burial site, perhaps seeking its master or driven by instinct to the place it knew best, has solved a series of crimes that might otherwise have remained hidden for decades if not centuries. The newspapers, which once romanticized Thomas Maguire as a gentleman bushranger, now recast him as the butcher of the Strathbogies, a monster who murdered men, women, and children for gold, training his dog to assist in subduing victims and guard the secret graveyard where he cached his plunder. But where is Maguire himself? The investigation into Thomas Maguire's whereabouts becomes the largest manhunt in colonial Victoria's history, surpassing even the later Kelly outbreak in resources committed and territory covered. Superintendent Nicholson, working from the evidence recovered at the burial site, constructs a timeline of Maguire's crimes. The personal effects allow identification of 6 victims: Patrick O'Brien, the pipe; Sarah Clements, the wedding ring; Ah Sing, the identification tag, and 3 others matched to missing persons reports through painstaking cross-referencing of dates, locations, and descriptions of carried valuables. The 3 remaining bodies resist identification, though one, a young adult male, carries a distinctive leather belt buckle marked with the initials W.H., possibly William Harding, one of the disappeared prospectors. What emerges is a pattern of predatory behavior that transcends ordinary bushranging. Maguire did not simply rob his victims, he selected them based on specific criteria. 1. They were traveling alone or in pairs, never in groups large enough to resist. 2. They carried substantial amounts of gold or currency, information Maguire likely gathered through observation or informants. 3. They were passing through remote areas where disappearances could be attributed to misadventure. 4. They were, with few exceptions, people whose disappearance would not trigger immediate, intensive investigation: swagmen, prospectors, widows, Chinese laborers who existed on the margins of colonial society. Dr. Headley's forensic analysis reveals additional disturbing details. Several victims showed defensive wounds, broken fingers, fractured forearms, suggesting they were alive and fighting for survival when killed. The dog bite marks on 3 victims indicate Warrigal actively participated in subduing them, trained to attack on command. Most chillingly, the execution-style headshots suggest Maguire killed his victims at the burial site itself, forcing them to walk to their own graves before murdering them. The practice is not merely efficient, it is calculated terror, ensuring victims' final moments are filled with the knowledge of their imminent death. The manhunt intensifies. Police raid selector families suspected of harboring Maguire, often with excessive force that will contribute to the anti-police sentiment that later fuels the Kelly outbreak. Informants are cultivated with promises of reward money and immunity. Wanted posters bearing Maguire's description blanket the colony. The reward increased to £500, an enormous sum. But Maguire has vanished. Weeks pass, then months. The trail grows cold. Some speculate he has fled to New South Wales or South Australia. Others whisper he may have died in the bush, his body consumed by scavengers, justice denied. The truth emerges on March 3, 1868, from an unexpected source. A selector named Margaret O'Brien, widow of the murdered Patrick O'Brien, approaches Father Brennan with information she can no longer in good conscience withhold. Her brother, Daniel Meagher, one of the accomplices who participated in the Whitehead's Creek robbery, has returned to her property in the dead of night, desperate and terrified. Meagher tell a story that, if true, explains Maguire's disappearance and adds a final grotesque coda to the saga. According to Meagher's confession, later given to police in exchange for reduced charges, Maguire's gang, consisting of Maguire, Meagher, and the large man identified as John Big John Burke, fractured in late November 1867 over division of spoils from their accumulated robberies. The argument reached a crisis on December 14th, 2 days before the lightning strike that would destroy the shepherd's hut. Maguire, increasingly paranoid and violent, accused Meagher and Burke of planning to betray him for the reward money. The confrontation occurred at the hut, one of Maguire's safe houses. Meagher's statement, given under oath, Tom had gone mad with suspicion. The money, all of it, had been cached at various locations he alone knew. He trusted no one, not even Big John, who had ridden with him for 2 years. That night he ordered Warrigal to guard us while he slept, the dog trained to attack if we moved. But John was not a man easily cowed. In the small hours he strangled the dog. God forgive us, the beast that had led us to so much blood and gold. The noise woke Tom, and John shot him before he could reach his weapon. Shot him 3 times, once in the belly, twice in the chest. Tom did not die quickly. He lived for hours, cursing us, refusing to reveal where he had hidden the majority of the gold. We searched frantically, but the man had cached it across miles of ranges, in locations only he knew. As dawn broke, Tom finally expired. John and I. We panicked. We buried him in the root cellar beneath the hut, covering the grave with stores and the dog's bed to disguise the disturbed earth. We agreed to separate, to return in a month when the heat had died down, to search methodically for the caches. But I could not bear it. The weight of what we had done, not just to Tom, but our complicity in his murders of innocent travelers. I fled to South Australia, tried to start anew. The knowledge of those bodies, those poor souls murdered for a few pounds of gold, it gave me no peace. Police immediately ride to the burned shepherd's hut. The root cellar, buried under fire debris, has indeed been disturbed. Excavation reveals a shallow grave containing the remains of Thomas Maguire, identified by his distinctive scar above the left eyebrow, and the dental work described in his initial police description from 1864. The corpse shows 3 gunshot wounds consistent with Meagher's account. Clutched in Maguire's skeletal hand is a small leather journal, its pages partially preserved, containing cryptic notes and crude maps that will occupy treasure hunters for decades. John Big John Burke is apprehended 2 weeks later in Sydney, attempting to book passage to California under a false name. In his possession 43 pounds in gold, and a list of locations in the Strathbogie ranges that, when investigated, yield 3 additional caches of stolen goods and currency totaling nearly 200 pounds. The trials of Meagher and Burke dominate Melbourne newspapers for months. Meagher, having turned Queen's evidence and shown genuine remorse, receives 15 years hard labor at Pentridge Prison. He will serve 11 years before receiving a conditional pardon, eventually dying in 1891 in Tasmania, where he worked as a church custodian. Burke shows no such remorse. His trial is contentious, his lawyer arguing that Burke acted in self-defense against Maguire's murderous paranoia. The jury is not swayed. Burke is convicted of murder and sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. He dies in Pentridge Prison in 1879 of tuberculosis, maintaining to the end that the gold is still out there, and Tom's ghost guards it still. But what of the dog, the half-wild Dingo whose final act solved the murders? Warrigal's body is examined by multiple natural historians fascinated by the animal's apparent intelligence and trainability. The consensus is that Maguire likely acquired the dog as a young pup, the offspring of a dingo and a shepherd dog, and raised it with a combination of brutality and reward that produced an animal of exceptional capability and loyalty. The veterinary surgeon's report notes, the extensive scarring suggests this animal was frequently beaten, yet its final action, returning to the site of its master's cached plunder despite its injuries, demonstrates loyalty that transcends self-preservation. Whether this represents canine devotion or merely instinct to return to a familiar location, we cannot determine with certainty. The mounted remains of Warrigal are displayed briefly at the Melbourne Museum before public outcry forces their removal. Many colonists, particularly in the Irish Catholic community, view the display as grotesque lionization of an animal that assisted in multiple murders. The remains eventually disappear into storage, their current whereabouts unknown. The 9 identified victims receive proper burial in a mass grave at Violet Town Cemetery, their names inscribed on a monument funded by public subscription. The monument reads simply, "To the unknown dead of the Strathbogie Ranges, murdered 1864 to 1867, may they rest in peace and may justice remember." But the investigation's work is not finished. Over the next 2 years, police excavate 17 additional suspected burial sites throughout the Strathbogie Ranges, locations identified through Maguire's journal, Burke's testimony, and reports from selectors who recall suspicious activities. They discover fragmentary human remains at 3 sites, though the bodies are too degraded to determine cause of death or identity. The final death toll attributed to Thomas Maguire is conservatively estimated at 12, possibly as high as 17. The total amount of gold and currency recovered represents perhaps 1/3 of his estimated takings, leading to persistent rumors that caches remain hidden in the ranges, guarded by the ghost of the bushranger and his half-wild dog. These rumors are not entirely fanciful. As late as 1923, a prospector named William Croft claims to have found a waterproofed bag containing 37 gold sovereigns buried beneath a distinctive rock formation near the original burial site. The sovereigns date from 1862 to 1866, and local historians believe them to be a Maguire cache. Similar discoveries occur sporadically throughout the 20th century, the most recent in 1987, when hikers uncovered 12 pounds sterling in a rotted leather purse hidden in a tree hollow. The Maguire case sends shockwaves through colonial Victoria that reverberate for decades, fundamentally altering police practices, legal procedures, and the public's perception of bushrangers. The investigation's revelations about the number of missing persons who were actually murder victims prompts the colonial government to establish the first centralized missing persons registry in 1869. For the first time, police forces across the colony are required to file standardized reports on disappearances, cross-reference cases, and share information systematically. Superintendent Nicholson, whose meticulous work on the Maguire case earns him promotion to Chief Commissioner in 1870, implements professional investigative standards borrowed from Scotland Yard. The concept of detective police, officers trained specifically in criminal investigation rather than mere peacekeeping, gains traction, with Nicholson establishing Victoria's first formal detective division in 1871. The use of Aboriginal trackers, demonstrated so effectively by Billy Mundara in the Maguire case, becomes standard practice in rural police work. Mundara himself has offered formal employment with the Victorian police, though he declines, preferring to work as an independent contractor. His tracking expertise will later prove crucial in pursuing the Kelly gang, perhaps most significantly, the Maguire case demonstrates the importance of forensic medical examination in criminal investigation. Dr. Headley's methodical documentation of the burial site and remains becomes a template for future crime scene investigation, and his testimony at the trials of Meagher and Burke establishes legal precedents for the admissibility of medical evidence. Before Maguire, the colonial press often portrayed bushrangers through a romanticized lens derived from British highwayman legends. Bushrangers were depicted as dashing rogues, driven to crime by oppressive authority, targeting only the wealthy and adhering to a code of honor that protected women and the poor. The Maguire revelations shatter this mythology. The murders of Sarah Clements, a widow traveling to family, and Ah Sing, a Chinese laborer sending money home to his family, exposed the reality that bushrangers often targeted the vulnerable rather than the powerful. The execution-style killings, the use of a trained dog to terrorize victims, the cache of personal effects stripped from corpses, these details cannot be reconciled with noble outlaw narratives. The Melbourne Age, which had previously run sympathetic accounts of bushranger exploits, publishes a scathing editorial on March 15, 1868. We have indulged too long in foolish romanticism regarding these criminals who plague our highways. Thomas Maguire was no Robin Hood, no gentleman bandit driven to crime by societal injustice. He was a cold-blooded murderer who preyed upon the defenseless, a monster who trained a beast to assist his depredations, a creature devoid of conscience who would shoot a child as readily as a grown man if profit beckoned. Let his name be forever synonymous with evil, and let us abandon the dangerous fiction that bushrangers are anything other than common criminals deserving of the gallows. This shift in public perception has lasting consequences. When Ned Kelly and his gang emerge a decade later, the press and public are far more skeptical of sympathetic narratives, though the Kelly mythology ultimately proves resilient enough to survive this earlier disillusionment. The murder of Ah Sing and the evidence suggesting additional Chinese victims highlight the particular vulnerability of Chinese prospectors and laborers in colonial Australia. The Chinese community, already subject to intense discrimination and violence, seizes upon the Maguire case to advocate for greater protection. The Chinese Benevolent Society in Melbourne petitions the colonial government in May 1868, arguing the murder of our countryman Ah Sing, whose only crime was industriousness and whose only provocation was carrying the fruits of honest labor, demonstrates the inadequacy of protection afforded to Chinese residents of this colony. We respectfully submit that increased police patrols in goldfield regions and severe penalties for crimes against Chinese persons are necessary measures to ensure our people may pursue their livelihoods without fear of robbery and murder. While the petition does not result in immediate policy changes, it contributes to a gradual recognition of Chinese victims' rights in the colonial legal system and establishes precedents that will be cited in anti-discrimination cases well into the 20th century. The aggressive police tactics employed during the Maguire manhunt, raids on selector families, harsh interrogations, threats against those suspected of harboring the bushranger, poison relations between law enforcement and the Irish Catholic community in northeast Victoria. Families like the Kellys, who had no connection to Maguire but faced police harassment due to their ethnic and religious identity, harbor resentments that will explode a decade later. Historians of the Kelly outbreak frequently cite the Maguire investigation's excesses as contributing factors to the anti-police sentiment that allows Ned Kelly and his gang to operate with community support. The informants who assisted police fare poorly. Margaret O'Brien, who provided the crucial information leading to Maguire's confession, faces ostracism from her community and eventually relocates to Melbourne, where she lives in genteel poverty until her death in 1889. Billy Mundara, the Aboriginal tracker whose skills proved essential to solving the case, receives a modest monetary reward but no formal recognition. He dies in 1891, his contributions largely forgotten until 20th century historians rediscover his role through archival police records. While the term serial killer will not be coined until the 20th century, the Maguire case represents one of the first thoroughly documented instances of serial murder in Australian criminal history. The pattern of victim selection, the cooling-off periods between murders, the concealment of bodies, and the apparent lack of remorse all align with what later criminologists will identify as classic serial killer behavior. Contemporary observers struggle to comprehend Maguire's psychology. The prevailing theories of criminal behavior in the 1860s attribute crime to moral weakness, poor breeding, or environmental corruption. Maguire fits none of these categories easily. He was literate, skilled, capable of planning and executing complex schemes, yet apparently devoid of normal human empathy. Dr. Headley, in a remarkable passage from his final report, comes closest to a modern understanding. One is compelled to conclude that Thomas Maguire suffered from a profound deficiency of moral faculty, an inability to perceive other human beings as possessing inherent worth beyond their utility to his purposes. This is not madness in the conventional sense. He was fully capable of rational thought and long-term planning. Rather, it suggests a corruption of the moral sense so complete as to render him functionally inhuman, capable of murder with no more compunction than one might feel swatting a fly. The belief that substantial amounts of Maguire's plunder remain hidden in the Strathbogie ranges creates a cottage industry of treasure hunters that persists into the 21st century. Maguire's cryptic journal, though incomplete and partially destroyed by fire, contains references to cached gold at locations described through landmarks. Beneath the Three Sisters, where the water runs red, the Eye of the Eagle Rock. Over the decades, amateur historians and treasure seekers have proposed dozens of interpretations for these clues. Small finds, a few sovereigns here, a bag of gold dust there, fuel the mythology and inspire new generations of searchers. The Victorian government, recognizing both the historical significance and the potential for dangerous excavation on public lands, designates the Strathbogie Ranges a heritage area in 1974. Unauthorized digging is prohibited, though enforcement remains challenging in the vast remote bushland. The Violet Town Cemetery monument to Maguire's victims becomes a site of historical pilgrimage, particularly after the publication of historian Ronald McAllister's definitive 1967 account, The Bushrangers' Dog, Murder and Gold in Colonial Victoria. Modern historians view the Maguire case as a cautionary tale about several phenomena: the romanticization of criminals, the vulnerability of marginalized populations in frontier societies, the importance of systematic investigation and forensic science, and the capacity for human evil that transcends simple explanations of poverty or oppression. The dog Warrigal occupies an ambiguous place in this historical memory. Was the animal a victim of Maguire's brutality, trained through violence to assist in crimes it could not comprehend? Or was it simply a tool, no more morally culpable than the gun Maguire used to execute his victims? The fact that the dog's final act, however unintentionally, brought justice to the murdered ensures its place in Australian criminal folklore, though historians caution against anthropomorphizing the animal's motivations. In 2017, the 150th anniversary of the discovery, the Violet Town Historical Society organizes a commemoration that attempts to balance respect for victims with honest reckoning with the case's broader implications. The event features presentations on colonial police practices, the treatment of Chinese Australians, the development of forensic science, and the psychology of serial murder. Notably absent from the commemoration is any romanticization of Maguire himself. Unlike Ned Kelly, whose legend has been continuously reinterpreted and rehabilitated, Thomas Black Tom Maguire remains a figure of almost universal condemnation, the bushranger whose crimes were so heinous they killed the romance of bushranging itself. What drove Thomas Maguire to such calculated brutality? Was he born without conscience, or did something in his experiences transform him into a monster? And what of Warrigal? Was the half-wild dog a victim of circumstance, or did it understand on some level the evil it served? The 9 confirmed victims, and possibly 8 more, died brutal deaths in the ranges of Victoria, murdered for gold they had earned through honest labor. Their bodies might never have been found if not for a lightning strike, a fire, and the final confused journey of a dying animal that led police to the truth. Leave your theories in the comments below. Do you think more of Maguire's caches remain hidden in the Strathbogie Ranges? Should Warrigal be remembered as a tool of evil or a loyal animal that ultimately brought justice? Subscribe to the Fear Abbey for more lost chapters of history, the dark corners where human nature reveals itself in ways we'd rather not see but must never forget. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, remember, the past is never quite as dead as we'd like to believe, and sometimes the truth is buried in places we'd never think to look. See you in the next video.